Steve. Welcome. Thank
Hi,
you so
Romy.
much
Great,
for being.
great to be here.
Yeah. So, Steve, should we just jump right in? So, my first question to you is tell me a bit about you and what you do, and especially around your journey as a pathfinder in human evolution and your work bridging science and spirituality.
Sure. Well, you've sort of captured the big headings there. I'm certainly a pathfinder, and I've been working with a model, a conventional model of human development, just over 20 years. And that came from some research that was done in the US last century now, sort of in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And that mapped out a developmental psychology progression. It showed a whole bunch of stages that people grow through in their lives, some dynamics around how the change between those stages happen. And they pioneered a couple of things with that model. Back in 2008, I was involved in organising the first formal train the trainer program with that model. So prior to that, there was no formal training system to teach people the model and qualify trainers. So I kind of initiated that and had the assistance of some wonderful colleagues at the time, including Christopher Cook from the UK, who actually ran the program, and I was a student, so I could get qualified. And that model has come with me, all the time since then, since I discovered it, I think in 2003. And I've got to the point where I know it so well that I get invited, to other countries to talk about it, which is great. One of the things that really confirmed that was a useful model for me was that at the time I found it, I was just about to go through a massive transformation myself. And I literally had a breakdown and went into hospital for a little while. Course of that, there was a part of me that was kind of witnessing it all and remembering that I just read this book about human development and change and saying to myself, this is exactly what I read in the book. I'm experiencing it. And I experienced a kind of a quantum leap in consciousness at that time, which is documented in the book about the research. So that really showed me, in a most direct and practical way, that this is an accurate model, and that's why I really threw myself into it in the years that followed. And I'm taking that model further at the moment with the light body development work that I've been doing for some years now. And when I first, I guess, started thinking seriously about the light body, it was from my own direct experiences with entheogens, particularly ayahuasca at the beginning, and then other psychedelics. And I had these experiences of feeling my energy body change while I was in those sessions. And for a while, I really didn't have any particular model or template, to figure out what was going on. And then eventually I started to find some information about the light body from different sources. And more recently, through assistance from higher intelligence sources, I've managed to document a very specific light body formation guide and map those stages of light body formation against the developmental psychology stages. So it's bringing conventional science together with spirituality, in a sense, and presenting it in a way that people can practically understand it, and it can be a useful guide to them. And so that human evolution, human development, and light body stuff is a central pillar of my work. And I'm also collaborating with a wonderful lady from Colorado named Shamaya Natumid, who runs the New Earth Arc Foundation. And Shamaya has brought through some amazing spiritual information and advanced science, which has come through the character that people would know as Thoth or Thoth. They call him in America, the ancient Egyptian character. And yeah, I interviewed Shamaya. I think it was the last episode that I published in my podcast, Future Sense, which is a good listen. And I asked her, how did you start bringing this information through, and what process did you go through to believe that it was true yourself? Yeah. And I think that's quite a critical thing, in this kind of work where you're bringing conventional stuff and trying to bridge it to things that are out there, is how do you come to understand whether this is correct or not? And if you're the person who's trying to make sense of it and use it in your life, how are you going to believe it? And so I asked her these questions, and she gave me some wonderful answers and spoke about her experience of meeting Edgar Mitchell, the famous NASA astronaut, and talking to him about the advanced science that she'd brought through. She had a number of meetings with him. And of course, he went on later to found IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a really interesting space to be working in. And with the benefit of work and the information she's brought through, I'm more informed about the planetary scale ascension process as well. And the Earth itself has its own light body that's in formation. And the bigger picture of, where's it taking us all?
Yeah, which is a really important place to navigate. Steve, you have such an incredible story from being an ex-vet, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about the experiences and the influences and the forces, the inner and the outer, that kind of shaped your focus and your journey to get to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So I came from a family where there was a history of military service. My father and his brother had been in the army, and my father's father as well. So it was an option that was, clearly on the table for me as a young man growing up in that family. And I loved being in nature. I loved working outdoors. I really couldn't see myself working in an office. And so, I ended up deciding to go into the military after I left school. And I was fortunate enough to get selected for officer training, and also I got an aviation cadetship. So what that meant was if I passed the basic officer training, I would go to pilot training in the Army. And I did that. I managed to complete the training and the pilot training. And for the first sort of 5 years of my work in the Army, I was a helicopter pilot and working mostly flying reconnaissance helicopters, so small helicopters, and working in a Pathfinder role. And I did that for 5 years. And after a few years, to be honest with you, I got a bit bored, and I really was more interested in working with people and leading teams. And so I transferred out of the aviation corps in the Australian Army into the infantry corps, which is a very unlikely thing to do. And a lot of people thought I was crazy. But in hindsight, it was the right thing for me to do. And I really enjoyed being an infantry officer. And I had some wonderful experiences working with teams of people, and particularly under hardship and challenging circumstances. And in 1993, I was a newly promoted major in the infantry, and I got sent to Somalia when the Americans led the big intervention there, and probably most famously known because of the film Black Hawk Down, I think, and that whole incident that happened. And that was a life-changing experience for me. It was my first time in Africa. It was very different to what I was used to. And it also, it exposed me to, a whole broad range of experiences that you just don't get outside of those extraordinary circumstances. And it was really full spectrum. Like, there were some amazing things and, some traumatic things as well. But I also got some insight while I was there into the American military machine and how it operates, and the commercial aspects of that as well. And those were things that I hadn't seen in Australia in our army, probably because we're on a much smaller scale. While I was there, I've always had a fairly strong sense of intuition. So that's just been a natural part of my life the whole time. And so I often, in those jobs in the military and as a pilot, I operated with my intuition at the forefront, sensing things. And that was very, very handy, particularly working in reconnaissance or as a Pathfinder, or in a dangerous place, where you need to sense exactly what's going on and know what might happen in the next minute.
Yeah.
And that intuition told me while I was in Somalia that basically that was the last box that I needed to tick. And I had some wonderful experience, while in the Army. I got tremendous leadership training, and the kind of leadership training that you just don't really get outside the military. Like, most people, I think, outside the military are put into leadership roles without any training, and they learn how to do it after the fact, whereas in the military you get trained first, which is great. And I spent a couple of years as an operations officer on a brigade headquarters of about 4,000 people, where I got some tremendous management training and, learned strategic planning and those sorts of things. So I came out of the military well equipped for the work I'm doing now, really. And I still, I rely on that discipline, the logical thinking processes, clear thinking, and all those sorts of things have been of great benefit to me ever since. And I don't regret it at all. And then jump in if you want to ask any questions, but I'll just keep going if you like.
Yeah, keep going.
Sure. So when I came to get out of the army, I had no idea what I wanted to do next. No idea. All I knew was that it was my time and I needed to get out. So just before I went into the process of sort of positioning myself to get out, and then I got offered a flying job outside the army. And of course, I can fly. I was well trained, and I thought, okay, well, this gets me out of the army. It's might not be what I want to do forever, but I went flying outside the army, and I had a couple of sort of one short-term job, just doing general flying kind of work, and then I got sent to a 12-month job flying tourists to a tropical resort island off the coast of Queensland, which was just the best working holiday that I could ever have.
Yeah.
After 11 hectic years of being in the army and going to a war, it was medicine for me. And then from that job, I went to a rescue helicopter pilot job. So flying a rescue machine in Mackay in central Queensland under pretty challenging conditions a lot of the time. And I enjoyed that. And I think after my time in the army and the war service, I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie. And I really, I wanted something like that. I wanted a job where there was risk and, people's lives were at stake and those sorts of things. And I really did enjoy that job. I did that for 5 years. But towards the end of it, I could feel myself getting a bit burnt out. And after a couple of years in that job, I started working a second job, which was running short training courses for managers. And then that sort of evolved into consulting work, working with organizations. And with my organizing experience from the army, I found it very easy to walk into a business and just say, oh, you guys need to fix this, this, and this, and then they'd write me a check. So that was a good sort of a segue as well. And then I got so much pleasure out of doing working with people once again and in organizations. And I was getting a bit burnt out from the rescue work. And so I decided to finish the flying job and transition into consulting full-time, running my own business. And I did that. And at that time, I also got involved in coaching, sort of personal life coaching and business coaching as well, at a time when the coaching industry was fairly young, talking sort of like around the end of the 90s. So that was interesting. And then I had a bunch of big, major life changes, how they give you those stress tests where you've got to tick all the things that are going wrong in your life.
Yes.
Well, around that time, I was ticking all the boxes. I had to turn the page over and write extra ones on the back. I went through the end of my marriage and relocation interstate, so I sort of moved away from my friends' network, started working in a new city and all of the challenges that are associated with that. And then I started to get sick from PTSD, which was sort of accumulated from my time in the military and my war service, and then 5 years as a first responder, going to accidents and those sorts of things. And that breakdown that I mentioned before, which happened just after I read that book, this is what I was talking about. So I went through that breakdown and breakthrough, and I came out the other side of it with a completely different perspective on life. And the particular transition that I was going through involved a quantum leap in consciousness. And the model that I work with, which comes from the research of Dr. Claire W. Graves, who's passed away now, is one of the few that I've come across that actually document this quantum leap in consciousness. And back when I went through it, which was sort of 2003, 2004, there weren't many people around who had that perspective. I was a Pathfinder. And if you look back in history, you can find evidence of people making that quantum leap in consciousness, way back to the early quantum scientists, around the early 1900s. Not many of them, mind you, but there were some. And so I certainly wasn't the first one on the planet to experience it, but there weren't a lot of people to talk to about it. But it was just very, very interesting from an internal perspective, looking out at the world with a new lens. And it was after that I started to do some formal training in the model that I'd read about in the book. I traveled over to America to train with one of the authors of the book. And then I came back and started to include that model in my consulting work and really specialized in change management and cultural change in organizations. And I guess one thing I skipped over there was in 1999, I had a spiritual awakening, which wasn't an enlightenment by any means, but it was just a sudden shift in my understanding. And And in hindsight, now that I've written the light body formation guide, I understand what happened was part of my light body geometry came online, and it was literally like somebody flicked a switch, and I had increased access to my oversoul, which meant stronger intuition and a sense of knowing about things. And so really ever since 1999, what I was aiming to do was to bring my spiritual path and my working path together as best I could. And so by that time that I was up to in my story, I'd been on track to bring my spiritual work into my everyday work for a while. And then training that model gave me a concrete structure to put around that. Because I think a lot of people, when they have a spiritual awakening, they feel different and they see the world different, but it's pretty hard to kind of find a hook to hang your hat on, or some sort of structure around you to hold on to and guide you. And that's really what my present day work is about, is offering people some structure, helping them understand a framework, exactly.
To integrate. Yeah.
Exactly. So you can get an idea of where you are, what's ahead of you, and what support you need to go through the processes, that you're experiencing and those sorts of things. And I also, a few years later, I started to speak publicly as a futurist, because I realized that this model of human development that I was working with, it was essentially a little map to the future of society, because the researcher, Dr. Graves, had captured like a bell curve of people, some people who were kind of, maybe behind the mainstream in terms of their development, a whole bunch of people in the middle, like you get on a bell curve, and then some people who are on the other side of the bell curve who are way ahead, and he documented some people who were basically 3 stages or worldviews ahead of the mainstream at the time. And so when I came across the model, I looked at it and I thought, wow, this is actually telling me how society is going to reorganize itself in the future. And so I started speaking about it from that perspective as well. And I got some support from a wonderful futurist who passed away recently, a guy called John Peterson, who ran the Arlington Institute in West Virginia in the USA, and got to know John, and then he invited me over to the States. And I think I spoke at the Arlington Institute in 2016 and 2017, just talking about what the future looked like from the perspective of looking through this model.
Yeah.
And because I discovered the model back in 2003, I've had a bit over 20 years of actually looking at society changing and realizing that, it's changing as the model predicted. So that's pretty cool too. And then I mentioned Somalian Atuma before. So I late 2019, I had another big change where a cousin of mine, whose family had been working on our family heritage for many years, actually tracked down our Australian Aboriginal relatives. And I have Aboriginal blood through my father's side of the family. And so I was able to go and meet our relatives, in central Queensland. And we'd been separated from them for about 110 years. And my father's mother was taken away as a baby from an Aboriginal family, and then grew up as an adopted child in a white family, and completely lost track of, who we were, where we came from, and those sorts of things. And so that piece of the puzzle fell into place in 2019. And then I subsequently, again, acting on my spiritual guidance, I moved to live up in central Queensland, around the Gladstone area, where my Green people come from. And my grandmother's first cousins were still there. And they'd been looking for us as well, because they knew that part of the family went missing. So I spent 2.5 years living up there and really immersing myself in Indigenous culture and getting to know the family and the land. And that was a really important part of my own development, and particularly connecting with the land.
Yes.
Where my ancestors came from, and having experiences like meeting ancestor spirits and listening to them and being guided to sacred sites and those sorts of things. So that was literally wild and an amazing couple of years. And then I came back from up there around the start of 2024, back down here to Byron Bay, where I am now. And I was thinking of, okay, I'm going to dive back into my work, but where do I start? And in terms of my own development, the map that I got from the research of Claire Graves was starting to run out. I was kind of getting close to the end of the map and didn't have any idea of what came after that. And then I discovered Shemaya Nartumit's work, and synchronistically her work fits together with this research like hand in glove. And where she begins to talk about human development is where the research map of Claire Graves ends.
Wow. That's
So that
amazing.
it is amazing, absolutely amazing, blew me away. And I just, and my mind started getting blown like every week, and now it's every day that these things happen. And
Oh, that's
so,
amazing.
yeah. And so I really threw myself into her work, and she's got a
Yeah.
vast amount of work. She's been documenting advanced science and spiritual information for 50 something years, and I still haven't worked my way through it, but I spent quite a few months really focusing on understanding her work and how it fitted together with this model that I work with. Then I reached out to Shemaya and I made contact, and she invited me to join a project that she was running. And this project is called Quantum Logica Interactive. And I kind of read about it, on her website, and couldn't quite get my head around exactly what it was, because a lot of the language that has come through her work it's kind of like you start reading a paragraph and you've got to go to the definition section, 3 or 4 times to check the terms and what they mean. It's very complex, but amazing, amazing work. And so I joined this program, and I'll explain what it is. So the character Thoth, as we know from the ancient Egyptian history, his soul is currently incarnated in the inner earth. And at that point, when I bumped into this work, I wasn't really sure whether I actually believed in the inner earth or not. Like, I knew that it was a thing that people spoke about. I didn't have any direct experience of it, and I just kept an open mind about it. But the story that I found is that he's working in the inner earth with people who live there to support the evolution of humanity and the planet herself, coming from the perspective that our planet Gaia is a living being. And the Quantum Logica Interactive project is broadcasting a frequency of energy from the inner earth to the surface. And the participants in the project here will be given an image template by Shemaya that she is guided to create, which is basically a colored pattern. And the instructions are to set up an altar in your home or wherever you want to set it up, and place this piece, to install it using a particular process, a ritual, and connect into the broadcast from the inner earth. And so in my first email, because I made contact with and connect into the broadcast from the inner earth. And so in my first email, because I made contact with Shemaya by email, in my first email back from her, she said, "Hey, by email." In my first email back from her, she said, "Hey, do you want to join this project?" And so I felt right, so I said, "Yeah, sure." And then within a couple of days, before I set up anything, I woke up about 1 a.m. and there was a woman in my room standing next to my bed, and it looked like a real woman to me. Like, it wasn't a fuzzy, ghosty figure or anything. It looked like there was a real woman standing in my room. And so I sat up in bed and looked again, and I realized that it wasn't a physical woman. It was an energetic shape that I was seeing, and there were other lights flashing in the room around this being that I could see, as if there was other energies there that I couldn't quite make out. And this woman looked at me and didn't speak, but I got a telepathic message saying, "I'm from the inner earth. Welcome to the program."
Wow.
And like, these things don't normally happen to me. Like, I've not been a person that has been particularly visual,
Yes.
in seeing things like that. So this is absolutely out of the box, big time, but it was real. And then within seconds of me getting that message from this woman, she slowly faded out of view, disappeared.
Amazing.
And yeah, and so I go, okay, well, there's my confirmation that it's real.
And so
And
your next chapter began.
Exactly. Yeah. Wild. And so while I'm on that track, I share a house with my colleague, Julia, who is also a director of our foundation. And we set up this altar with the template for the Quantum Logica Interactive and everything. And as soon as we set it up, you could like put your hands over it and feel the energy coming through. It was really impressive. And after a few weeks, or might have even been a couple of months, I had a friend come to visit who lives locally and is a professional clairvoyant. So she's very sensitive. And I said to her, do you want to have a look at this thing we've set up here? Check it out. I showed her you can put your hands over it and feel the energy if you like. And so she went up and did that. And I'm standing probably about, 15 feet away just watching her. And all of a sudden she just leaned over backwards, and stared up at something like this. And I couldn't see anything. And I said, what happened? And she was like breathless. And she said, a man just came out of the template and spoke to me. And she described the person, and it sounded just like the images of Thoth that Shamaya publishes. So, for my clairvoyant friend, I mean, she's used to dealing with interdimensional things, it's her work, but she was a bit taken aback even by that because it was a bit of a spectacular thing. And so I wrote an email and said, hey, this just happened.
Yes.
And she wrote back and she said, wow, she said, that's Thoth that she saw. And she said, we've had a few interesting things happen around the templates. I think she said that people had seen, like hands appear and other things, but never actually Thoth popping out of the template. So, yeah. And it just keeps getting weirder now.
Would you say Thoth is like an archetype, an energy that has a specific purpose? And how would you describe that?
He's an advanced being who obviously operates in another dimension, a higher frequency dimension than ours. And he has incarnated many times. And I've learned this from Shamaya's records. And he has been various characters, throughout the history of our planet, including I think the original Lord Melchizedek. Some people who are familiar with mystery schools might know that name. And I think it's mentioned in the Bible too that Jesus or Yeshua was a priest in the order of Melchizedek. And he has a reputation as a record keeper, so an archivist who, is a guardian and a disseminator of knowledge and codes and keys and those sorts of things, and has been quite central to the development of humanity on this planet over the years. It's a big story, so I'm kind of summarizing it here. But it's, if people want to delve into Shamaya's work, her website is newearthstar.org, and there's a wealth of information there, and well organized into playlists on her YouTube channel as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Get down that rabbit hole. So you left out a little part of your journey, and I really see your path of emergence. I really working in the sort of the physical world as a pilot and as a vet, and moving through leadership and human connection. And then you also worked a lot with ayahuasca, and you did a lot of plant medicine work, and that really also was quite profound in your journey. Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So when I moved to Melbourne to do consulting work down there, I made a friend down there who turned out to be a really important connector in my life, a wonderful man named Ron Laurie, who's still doing this kind of work, in not medicine work, but change management work and human development work in Melbourne. And Ron was key in connecting me to the research that I've been talking about, the Claire Grace research, because he was qualified in that. And he also connected me to the work of Ken Wilber, and I studied Ken Wilber's work and found that very useful as well. And Ron had grown up in Scotland and had some awareness of psychedelics and things, from his younger years. And we had a conversation about that one day, and I was completely naive, so I'd drunk an awful lot of alcohol in the army. But apart from that, had not been exposed to psychedelics or any kind of mind-altering drug, really. And Ron was saying to me that, he thought these things could be useful to human development. And so I said to him, well, if we ever get an opportunity, let's explore that. And so a few years later, he rang me up, and this is many, many years ago, so it's I think it's okay to talk about. He said that he'd been invited to a ceremony, an ayahuasca ceremony, and I didn't even know what ayahuasca was, so I did get on the internet and Google it, find out what it was, and I thought it sounded interesting. So I said to him, yeah, okay, I'll come. And then I went into that as a consequence of the conversations that I'd had with him. I went into that first experience with a question in my mind: is this something that would be useful in my spiritually oriented work, for helping people expand their consciousness and wake up and those sorts of things? And so in that first experience, and I might mention too that by that time, I'd been meditating for about 7 years, and I was doing a Taoist open-eyed meditation and had had some pretty unusual experiences doing that, just standing open-eyed meditating, where the ground started to ripple as if it was made of water and those sorts of things. So, I was somewhat accustomed to altered states from that. And then when the medicine kicked in on my first journey, a little like an elf kind of a man appeared and took me on a journey, and it was a tutorial. The whole thing was just a tutorial saying, okay, here's what you can do with this medicine. You can do this, you can do that. You can go inside other people's bodies and heal them. And so I came out of that experience knowing that, okay, yeah, I got the answer to my question. This is something that I can use. So straight away. And another influence that I'd had too, just prior to that, was somebody had gifted me a book from Carlos Castaneda.
Yes.
Yeah, you know who he is, obviously. So I'd read a couple of his books as well, which gave me a bit of an insight, I guess, into the entheogenic world. And so I realized that, okay, yeah, this is something I can use, and it's a pretty impressive tool. So I set an intention of being able to work with it myself, and then it was some years of getting further experience and learning before I actually got to the point where I could do that. And that included a trip over to work with some people from Ecuador, from the Sequoia tribe, who were traditional users of ayahuasca. But I found that the experience that I'd gained here in Australia was actually pretty solid and had laid a good foundation for me. And so again, I was about to take another left turn in my career. I also, at the time, a few years earlier, actually, in 2004, as a result of meeting somebody and getting guidance, I ended up joining a mystery school called the Rosicrucian Order. And so I had a few years of learning in a mystery school under my belt as well before I actually started facilitating myself. And that would have been probably about 6 or 7 years of, of being
Yes. Wow. Yes. Wow. Great. And now as well, I mean, yeah, I'm seeing so much funding going into biotech companies. I mean, yes. I loved your imagery of the helicopter being this kind of like this. You are a pathfinder, and that's why I love your story because it really does look to me as this beautiful story of emergence. And obviously, you would really understand what it's like to be at that frontier, that emergent age. You know, you talk about pushing and knocking on people's doors for like 10, 11 years, and you'll know how tough it is sometimes to be that kind of a leader pushing these emergent ideas and technologies because it takes a while for the world to sometimes catch up. But so my question to you is about leadership. You know, we really first of all, how would you define a leader? No. Yeah, I love yes, yes. So that was my next question. Bef- bef- So you carry on, and then I've got another question for you. Right. Yeah. Yes. Yes. When you were speaking, that's exactly what I was seeing as you know, I'm very passionate about regenerative leadership, heart-centered leadership. This project has been about following the heart, making connections, having conversations, stewarding forward these ideas. And when you were talking, I was really seeing the whole system infinitely. So, you know, really seeing how humanity has been very much separated. We've operated in a hyper individualistic way, each to their own. But it's kind of silly because, I mean, imagine the cells in our bodies behave like that and weren't, you know, kind of operating in coherence. And we are also just these sort of cells on a bigger body and those, and, you know, and that can go on infinitely. And that's where coherence is so powerful. And so that was kind of, you kind of answered my question already, but, you know, I wanted to ask you why it's so important that leaders and people who are creating in the world and developing, whether it's organizations or methodologies, why it's so important for them to be doing this work, consciousness work, activation, embodiment. And I guess because, you know, I think that personal sort of emergence or that personal activation is what contributes to the whole, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's, you know, as a sort of biomimicry practitioner, I love to see that kind of sensing. I mean, when you see birds in a murmuration, and it's about, there are these parts, but there's also this whole, and it's about, you know, for me, regenerative leadership or leadership into the next, into what's next is about creating systems where everybody thrives. And that's, you know, and maybe even sometimes a misunderstanding that sovereignty is about me and what's you know, what's good for me, but without the understanding that what's good for me and you need to, you know, correspond. where can people find you and engage more deeply in your work, first of all? Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the chat. Steve. I really, really appreciate your time and sharing your super unique story and yeah, just your journey. And I'm really excited about this. I think it's a really interesting time to be alive and an opportunity for all of us to step in, do the work a little bit more deeply, really, tune into our higher sort of purpose and build something new. At least, put our intention there and create something that is more heart-centered. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, I've already got some ideas, so we'll definitely be in touch very soon. Thanks so much, Steve. I'll be in touch soon. Thanks, hey. Bye.